First, I'm going to read the card, Luther's 95 Theses. There are actually three parts that are going to get talked to in this card, and we'll kind of parse them individually. Ad Luther at Wittenberg, convert Wittenberg to Protestant religious influence. 2 regulars are moved there from the electorate display. Protestant player makes 5 Reformation attempts targeting the German language zone. Protestant rolls 1 extra dice in each attempt. Bucer may be committed for his debater bonus during this event if desired. So the first part of the card looks like this. We have added Luther the Reformer. We've added the 2 regulars out of the electorate display, and we've flipped the hexagonal control marker to the white side. That indicates Protestant religious control. That is separate and different from the political control. The Habsburg player still maintains political control or of that space. Let's talk about the third part of the card first. So, Bucer the debater is a value 2, and he says, +1 die for Reformation within 2 spaces of Strasbourg. That's where the blue 6 is sitting. So this is what that means, is you're going to have to go through Leipzig to get to that 2-space area. And then you've got a lot of nice little spaces that you can convert. There's a couple disadvantages to doing this. First, Leipzig is not one of the electorate spaces that actually gets troops. The second is that, in general, you're better off clustering your attempts in a very small area so that as you convert spaces, it becomes additive. You convert 1 space, and then the next space you try to convert, you get an advantage because you've got 2 Protestant spaces around it. Okay, let's come back to the middle part of this card, which is really the heart of the card and really the heart of this tutorial. Protestant player makes 5 Reformation attempts targeting the German language zone. In natural English, that means you got to go in the German language zone, period. In HIS, that's not really what it means. What this means in HIS is that if you are outside of your language zone, you lose ties. Inside your language zone, you win the ties. So let's compare Breslau and Brandenburg. You get 1 die for 1 adjacent Protestant space. You get 1 die for an adjacent Reformer. You get 1 die for Protestant army. And you get 1 die just because it's Luther's 95. And so that's a total of 4 dice. And so you're going to get 4 dice whether you roll in Brandenburg or whether you roll in Breslau. Okay, let's go through in detail how you resolve an actual Reformation roll. In order to make a Reformation roll, you must have an adjacent Protestant space. There's also a rule about going port to port. You always qualify for 1 die. Beyond that, it will depend on the circumstance. So in this case, for Brandenburg, we have 1 adjacent Protestant space, so that's your first die. You have an adjacent Protestant army, that's a second die. You have an adjacent Reformer, that's your third die. And finally, 95 Theses gives an extra die to all these rolls for all 5 rolls. So that is where that 4 has come from that I showed you a couple seconds ago. What's going to happen is the Protestant is going to roll 4 dice, and he's going to keep the highest die that he rolls. The papacy is going to try to beat that roll. If the Protestants are winning ties and they've got a 6, barring really unusual circumstances, the papacy can only roll a 6. Protestant wins ties, therefore Protestant will win if they roll a 6. Now let's count how many dice the papacy gets to defend Brandenburg with. First, there are 3 adjacent Catholic spaces. The white die that I've just added represents the number of dice being rolled by the papacy. Other things that would give the papacy dice: a Jesuit university adjacent, a Catholic stack adjacent. If there's a Jesuit university in the space, you get 2 extra dice. If there's a Catholic stack in the space, you get 2 extra dice. Now let's consider instead if Luther decides to target Prague. Not in the German language zone, so they are going to lose ties. The Protestants in this case against Prague have the same 4 dice that they have against Breslau and Brandenburg. Now let's look at what the papacy gets to roll. First, there are 3 adjacent Catholic spaces. Catholic unit in space gives 2 extra dice. So if the Protestant player decides to target Prague, the papacy is actually going to be rolling 5 dice to the Protestants' 4, and the papacy is going to win ties. As you would expect, the Protestant player is not going to give away one of its 95 Theses reforms Reformation attempt that's likely to actually fail. So they are going to do Brandenburg. So there are the 4 dice rolled by the Protestant, the 3 dice rolled by the papacy. Strangely symmetrical die rolls. The Protestant player has effectively a 5. That's it, all that work to come to the number 5. The papacy also has the number 5. We are tied, we are in the German language zone, therefore the Reformation attempt succeeds. Brandenburg religious control is flipped to the white side, and the electorate comes down from the Brandenburg space. Now for their second Reformation attempt, they're going to get Magdeburg. You're going to start with 2 base dice because there are 2 adjacent Protestant spaces. You then add 2 more dice for the army units, the Protestant army units in each of those hexes, for a total of 4. You now have 1 for the Reformer adjacent is 5, plus 1 for 95 Theses. The papacy defense roll is going to be a 3, 1 for each of the 3 adjacent Catholic spaces. Because the Protestant is now rolling a big old handful of dice, it's probably easier to just let the Protestant make their 6 rolls and see if they get a 6. If they do, there's no need to even calculate the Catholic side. The rolls are made, a 6 appears, and so the papacy roll is just irrelevant. The Magdeburg will flip to Protestant religious control. Now, some additional notes about Reformation attempts. The 95 Theses, the opening game card, obviously is only going to happen once, but Reformation attempts are going to happen all throughout the game. So that once you really have a good handle on this for 95 Theses, it'll carry to the rest of the game. Now, this is explained, the procedure is kind of explained on the religious struggle card. A couple notes that I want to add here. Each space on the map can only be the target for a Reformation attempt once per impulse. So if you play a card and do Reformation attempts and particular place fails, you can't then say, okay, well, I'm going to use my second point to target the same one. I would believe, I don't remember seeing this specifically called out in the rules, but I would believe that that would be true for 95 Theses, is that 95 Theses would represent an impulse. And so if you happen to fail at a particular spot, I would say that you can't try to roll that spot again. That's kind of interesting because maybe then you don't go after Brandenburg first, because you really want to get Brandenburg, because that gets another one of the actual electorate spaces under your control. So you might go to Magdeburg or whatever it is first, and then go to Brandenburg second. Note about the ports. When you target a space, it can be a space that has a reformer or is adjacent to a Protestant space, or be a port connected to a C zone that contains other ports under Protestant religious influence. And so that's interesting, because if the Protestants could convert Hamburg, which looks to me like it's on the North Sea side, not the Baltic Sea side, then you could go down and you could get Amsterdam or Antwerp, or you could go into, you could possibly go into England. So to conclude out the 95 theses here, the Protestants are going to first try to get Lubeck, and then try to get, that'll get Stettin pretty well surrounded, and then they'll try to pick that up. So for Lubeck, it's going to be 1 die for Magdeburg, 1 die for Brandenburg is 2 dice, 1 die for 95 theses is 3, plus 1 for the army unit. So that's total of 1, 2, 3, 4. The papacy has 2 adjacent Catholic spaces, so the papacy will roll 2 dice in defense. The Protestants roll 6 on one of their dice, so the papacy roll becomes irrelevant. Lubeck is flipped and converted to Protestant religious control. The Protestants look to close out 95 Theses with another conversion attempt against Stettin. Here we've got 2 adjacent Protestant spaces for 2 dice, 95 Theses for a 3rd die, and a Protestant army for a 4th die. The poor papacy has no adjacent Catholic spaces. That's okay. The papacy still gets to roll 1 die. This final one was no sure easy thing. The Protestant roll was mostly kind of not very good, with just enough to beat a kind of so-so papacy roll. So Stettin will be flipped to Protestant religious control. And I realized I can't count very well. We've got 1 auto conversion, but then the Protestants get 5 conversion rolls. They're still due a conversion roll. So they will try to get Leipzig. So for this conversion attempt, the Protestants have 4 dice rolls, 1 adjacent, 1 for the army, 1 for the reformer, and 1 for 95 Theses. Catholic has 2 adjacent Catholic spaces, so the papacy is going to roll 2 dice. The Protestant player rolls a 6, so that's for their winning ties, so they automatically win that conversion attempt. So at this point, we have actually finally finished the 95 Theses. We've ended up with 6 spaces under Protestant religious control.